Welcome to Shaun and Ari Discuss Israel. For today's episode, Shaun and I will be switching places. We will be discussing the events surrounding October 7th from Shaun's perspective. Shaun, are you ready?
Let's get started.
All right. Before we get into the actual events surrounding October 7th and how you experienced them and what you did from there, how about you first share with us a little bit about your journey from South Africa to Israel, from then to today?
So I'm born in South Africa to I would call it a very passionately Zionist family. Both my father and my grandfather were very much involved in the community, both from a religious perspective, but also the Jewish day school. And it became very clear for me that my personal future as a Jew and the future of the Jewish people is in Israel. It was a very personal decision, and it was solidified for me at the age of 16 when I came on my first organized tour to Israel. I'd come many times before, almost every year since I was about 3 years old. I came to Israel with my family. But when I was 16, I came on my first organized trip to Israel with friends, actually through B'nai Akiva. And for me, this was where I solidified the idea that as a Jew, for me, the future is here in Israel. And everything I did from that point on in school and all my other interactions was with the idea that after I graduate high school, I will be coming for a year in yeshiva and then the army, and this is where I would make my future. And that's exactly what happened. I graduated high school. I came on a one-year program to Israel that was predominantly in yeshiva in Shiloh. I was in the army, university, met my wife. We have 4 beautiful children. And for the past more than 10 years, I work at an organization called NGO Monitor. And I have very much lived what I set out to do nearly 30 years ago with the idea of this is where I'm building my future and the future of the Jewish people.
Wow. That's awesome. All right. Tell us a little bit about what you did in your regular army service and then how that carried over and where you ended up doing reserves for the last 10, 15, 25 years. So that we understand when we start talking about October, so we understand where you're at from a army perspective.
So when I was drafted into the army, I was drafted into the Nachal Brigade, and I was actually part of what they call a Garin, where you go in with a bunch of people with a similar background. So I was drafted into the 50th Battalion of the Nachal Infantry Brigade, which is known to have a significant amount of people from kibbutzim and moshavim, and the mentality is often regarded as more politically left-leaning. In that, I was also with a group of olim from around the world, French, American, Swedes, and there was also a garin from B'nai Akiva kibbutzim. Because people come in from these different backgrounds, even back then, it is regarded as a unit with a high amount of motivation. And before the army changed its model where there was different sayarot, Gdud Chamishim, which I was in, was regarded as one of the reconnaissance units of the battalion. And then from there, it broke off into different companies for special forces units. So I was in the 50th Battalion. After my basic and advanced training, and then we went into specialized training, I then spent a significant amount of time actually in Lebanon before Israel left. I was in Lebanon until 2000. In May 2000, I was part of the division that pulled out of Lebanon. After that, I did significant training, and I was in Yehuda and Shomron for the first time, initially in Shechem, and then in Hebron, and then I was in Gaza. And at the very end of my service, the second Intifada broke out, and we were based in Shechem for the end of my service, which was about 6 months. I was then released from army service, went into university, and then in Pesach 2002, as a result of a number of suicide bombings that had peaked in 2002, specifically with the Pesach bombing in the Park Hotel, the Operation Defensive Shield broke out, with the Israeli army deployed into all the Palestinian towns and villages. The most significant one was in Jenin, and I was drafted into the Shomron Brigade of the army, and I was initially there with a number of other guys I served with, And then from there, I moved into the brigade itself, and I've been there ever since. And we are, based on our experience, the reconnaissance battalion for the Sumeria Territorial Brigade, and we're based almost entirely in the southern sector of Shechem.
An area I know well from my army service. All right. So now we're going to fast forward. As we all know, October 7th was Simchat Torah, which is the end. It's the last holiday of the holiday season in Israel that starts from Rosh Hashanah. As a parent with 4 children myself, that's a very busy time for us where we have a lot going on, usually based around shul and synagogue and stuff. And when you have kids of different ages, you want to have different experiences, both religiously and socially, for each child. So why don't we pick up from October 7th and not from the morning of? Let's go to the night before. Friday night, you come home from shul with your wife, your children, you have dinner, take it from there.
So that Friday night, with all the Chagim and everything else, starting with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, we were really on a high as a family. And by the time the end comes, it's already now the last night, we're done. It's been a long festive season. We've enjoyed it. We spent hours at shul, especially that Friday night, and we're sitting down, we're eating dinner together, and everyone's just got this we're done feeling in a very positive way. And we're deciding, well, the older kid, my 2 older teenagers, they want to go with their friends to one shul, and my younger daughter wants to join them. Me and Abby, my incredible wife, are like, oh, well, we're kind of a little tired. What if we go to the sunrise davening, early morning davening called Vatikin? What if we do that very early? There's a shul that's 5 minutes from our house. We'll daven there at 6 in the morning. We'll be done by about 9. We'll come home. We'll have coffee. And then we'll make our way over to the other kids and their dancing and their festivities. And the question was, well, what about my youngest kid, who at the time was 9? And we said, well, he's 9 years old. We're going to be at shul 5 minutes away. What's the worst that can happen? A war breaks out. He'll be fine. It's okay. And that's exactly what we did.
Famous last words.
Absolutely.
All right, so the sirens go off in Yerushalayim at around 8:15. You're still in shul, I'm guessing, at that time. So let's start from there and tell us what happens then from that point, what you do until you get a phone call to go to reserve duty.
So at 8:15, the first siren goes off. It's as we're finishing, we're really at the end of prayers on Simchat Torah. The siren goes off, and I look across, and Abby looks at me, and she mouths Ami, the name of my 9-year-old. And without thinking, I run out of shul. Even though there's a siren, I know my 9-year-old is home alone. I'm confident he knows what to do, but I don't want him to be there alone. And as I'm outside shul, the siren is still going on. And I heard, and more importantly, I felt the missile interception. The Iron Dome had intercepted a missile near or above Jerusalem. And I actually felt the echo or the backdraft of that interception. And for me, that was my oh shit moment. This is something real. There'd been sirens in Jerusalem before. There had been interceptions around Jerusalem. But something of this magnitude, it is 8:15 on a Shabbat morning and a Chag morning, and I'm hearing a major interception, and I'm feeling this interception. Something is different. And I ran upstairs. My son had already locked himself in the shelter in our apartment. I hugged him. He cried a little bit, but he was fine. At least physically, he understood something was wrong. We sat down on the bed in the shelter. We waited a few minutes. We went outside. I made him breakfast. By then, Abby had come, and I said, at this stage, I said very calmly, okay, Abby, something is up. I went to my phone. I turned it on, and I put my phone down in the kitchen, and then I made Kiddush. I poured myself a really nice scotch. I made Kiddush. I took a swig of scotch, poured myself a second scotch, shut it down, and then I looked at my phone, and I saw, before anything else, I saw actually that there were a lot of alerts from different news sites about rockets, and then slowly started filtering in news about terrorist infiltrations on the Gaza periphery. And I said to Abby, something's up. This is different. I'm going to go get the kids. So I ran with my phone in my pocket to the shul where my kids were. Was maybe 7 minutes away. They were there in the bomb shelter with the entire community. I called them out and we ran back home. And then on the way back home, this is now about 9 o'clock, my WhatsApps are now starting to buzz. And I looked, I didn't really pay much attention. One of them was from my commander. And it was, for me, this was almost like, yeah, this is what I've been waiting for. We got home and my company commander had sent out the first text message and it said something major has happened in the south. Be prepared for a call up. This was at 8:50. I'm looking at it now. This was at 8:50. Okay. And then at 9:15, he sent out a separate text message to all the officers and the sergeants saying, prepare yourselves for at least 3 weeks. Anytime now we're going to get a call up. And then at 9:50, my brigade commander sent out another text message saying, nothing official yet, but make your way over to our draft office.
So like most of the Army, it seems like your commanders called you guys up on their own without waiting for the system to kick in. When you get that message, what's the first thing you do? Is your bag already packed? Do you add stuff? Do you have to first put it together? Where do you go? What's your process? You got that phone call. You now have an actionable item. What do you do next? Do you sit your kids down and have them get your bag ready with you? Like, what's your process?
Well, my kids are used to me going away on Miluim. For the last 20 plus years, I'm usually anywhere from a month away on Miluim to sometimes randomly in the middle of the week, I can go for a day or two. So all my kids are used to this. They don't always love it, but they understand this. And I think instinctively they even realized this time it's something different. When I got that first text message, by the time I'm home, again, I looked at all of them and they understood. I said, I have to go down now to the storeroom and get my army bag. And it was understood. In our storeroom, I've got my own section in our store closet. It was behind a couple of boxes, so I had to move things away. But there I have prepared is a bag, and I'd call it a bag and a smaller footlocker that has almost everything I need for the Army. My uniforms, an extra jacket, and a whole lot of odds and ends that I've collected over the years. Pieces for my rifle, different things for comfort, a pillow, all these little extras that I need for the Army. I came upstairs with my very large bag from the Army. I threw in a couple of pairs of underwear, my toothbrush, and from there, my next stage was to find out who else is going from Jerusalem. And immediately, one of my younger lieutenants said he's driving through Jerusalem. He has a larger car. He'll pick up anybody who needs to go. So I said, great, pick me up. And within 5 minutes, I was outside and he'd pick me up. We picked up 3 other guys on the way. We then were driving in silence to our draft base. It's in a place called Machane Ofer. And we're driving there in silence. We had the radio on, but it was soft. And there were 5 of us in the car. Everyone had their own thoughts. Mine was, this is what we've been training for forever. Our unit has had one major mission that we've been told about for years. If and when there is a war, our job as the reconnaissance unit of the Samaria Territorial Brigade is to get to the divisional headquarters as soon as possible so that whichever special forces or reconnaissance unit is there can go to wherever the war is, whether it's in the north or the south. And specifically for the last, I'd say 10 years, we'd actually practiced this from being called up in the middle of the day by the Army and saying, you need to get to the divisional headquarters within the next 4 hours. And we'd actually physically have to get our equipment, load up and get there, to an exercise on the phone where they'd say, okay, what do you do now? And you'd have to simulate it with somebody on the phone, to just having to go to our draft location and then speak about it. And then we'd have a little discussion. But we've been practicing this for years, and it had been drilled into us. This is what we need to do. And we're driving to our emergency call-up center in absolute silence. And I think all of us had this idea of, we don't fully know what's going on, but we are ready for this. Whatever it is, we're ready.
Okay. So now my question is, all of that training and all that practicing, did the system work the way it was supposed to? Because I know that when I was leaving Jerusalem to go to my emergency call-up depot, I drive right by Machano for where you are. And that was the only time I had traffic, because there were cars parked on both sides of the highways, and what's normally a 2-lane highway over there was maybe one if I was lucky. Did the call-up work the way it was supposed to? Was your equipment waiting for you the way you had planned it? Was it as smooth as it was in training? And if not, was that a problem? What do you think about it?
So, yes, it was as smooth because we'd practiced this exact scenario so many times. So everything for us, and I think different people in different units, you spoke about it, different people have had different experiences on the morning of the 7th. For us, it was, we had drilled this before. Everything to the point of we knew exactly where each item was. We knew where the keys were for each lock to open, whether it is the ammunition storage or the weapon storage or the heavy equipment. We knew everything was. There was, ironically, there was a lock where it seemed the key had broken off. But even that we trained for. We knew where the axe was to break the lock to get the equipment. So everything worked for us, to the point that we were ready to go. First, all the officers, all the senior officers and the officers and the sergeants, we got there ahead of time so that we could set up an assembly line. It really was an assembly line. A soldier pitches up, check your name off on the list. Here's your kit bag. Okay, from your kit bag, you go and you open it up. Here's your webbing. Here is your bulletproof vest. Here is your magazines. Here is your rifle. If you're a specialty, you go over here. You get your, whether it's a mortar or a sniper, everything else there. Okay, good. Right, now you fill up your water. Everything was bang, 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 bang. Well, sorry, not like that. Everything was in order. And now came the big wait. Because what do we do now? We exactly what we trained. We've got our equipment now to get to the divisional headquarters. And this is where we had our first system breakdown, is we were already, the army wasn't.
Well, that's the story of almost every military in the world, is hurry up and wait. There's always someone else who's falling behind.
Exactly. So the difference there was, well, we need to get to the divisional headquarters. There was no transport. So we just got in our cars and drove there. And it's a little bit bizarre to think about, you've got an entire battalion fully kitted out in all our equipment, driving in a convoy of civilian cars, driving through civilian areas in some cases, a long convoy of fully armed soldiers.
In civilian cars.
In civilian cars. And then on the way there, the first thing we hear is, don't go to the territorial headquarters. We actually have to stop off first at the major intersection, which is called Somet Tapuach, which will play a major part in the rest of our conversation. And we stop off there, and that is where we have our first major briefing.
So you drafted in the morning, you had all your equipment, then you head out, right? You all get this convoy of cars, leaves your call-up depot at around...
Now it's about 11 o'clock.
At night?
No. We're still
in the morning. Oh, wow. Wow, that is fast. Okay, so at 11 o'clock in the morning, I still haven't left Jerusalem yet.
So that's what I say. For us, this had been drilled into us. We were so ready.
Wow. All right, so 11 o'clock in the morning, you guys get in this convoy, and you're heading out of Ofer, so there probably weren't even that many cars parked there yet, because I wasn't even close to that.
Now we actually see the cars starting to pile up on the roads outside.
Also, because remember, Ofer is an emergency call-up depot
for the entire Central Division.
For everyone.
Right.
Anyone who's not officially going north or south, that's where they go. It's an enormous amount of people. And normally, it's a very empty army base. There's a prison and a court, and then a huge amount of storage areas.
So that's, again, the point is we trained for this. We'd practiced this so many times. We call it a maze of storage areas. We knew where our personal storage area was, to the point that almost each individual soldier knew where to go and get his stuff so that we could be in and out before the rush.
That's amazing. So you guys go on this convoy. You guys get to what's called Tzomet Tapuach, this big junction in it's a little bit south of Shechem, south of Nablus. What happens from there?
Okay, so Tzomet Tapuach is one of the most underrated but central junctions in all of Israel. If you imagine the West Bank is divided into Yehuda and Shomron, Judea and Samaria, north-south across the West Bank is what's called Route 60. And Route 60 goes from Beersheba to Hebron to Jerusalem, Ramallah, Shechem, and all the way up to Afula. And that is north-south. East-west, it actually goes from Tel Aviv. Route 5 goes from the center area of Tel Aviv and Ariel, and then all the way down to the Jordan Valley. And the intersection where Route 60 and 5 meet, north, south, east, west, is Tzomet Tapuach. If you want to imagine the state of Israel is a dartboard, the bullseye is Tzomet Tapuach. It is such a central location, and it is in the middle of the West Bank. And it's just south of Shechem, Nablus. So we stop there. There's a yeshuv there called Kfar Tapuach, and outside is a relatively small base. And we park all our cars on the side of the road there, and we're on this embankment, if you want to call it, and we're just waiting. The problem is we get information that we're in civilian cars, and we don't want to drive all the way to the divisional headquarters because there's stoning on the road, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about what's going on. So now we break up into our different platoons and companies, and we start having our first discussions about who's ready, not only practically for our equipment, but we start having our first mental discussions about what are we going to need to do? Is everyone ready for whatever can come up? And we started going through different scenarios of blocked roads, of major riots, all these different things. And while this is happening as well, we're starting to see the first videos coming of the atrocities of October 7th.
Wow, that must have hit you guys hard when you were sitting there waiting for your mission to see what was going on down south. Do you want to touch a little bit on knowing there's a war going on? At this point, you know there's a war going down south, right? You know there's about to be a war going on down south, and here you are, a larger group of specially trained soldiers in Samaria. Now, even though that's the mission you trained for and that's the mission you practiced for, maybe touch for it on the feeling of you're here in Samaria and there's a war going on down south without you.
There was this feeling of, colloquially it's called FOMO, fear of missing out, that we've trained for a major mission. Something is happening down south. They need soldiers. They need trained and equipped soldiers. We're trained and equipped, but we're here. There was that initial feeling, but we overcame it. I remember having this discussion, and I said, it's happening down south, and we're here. And instinctively, we said to ourselves, our mission is here. Our mission is here so that whoever is here can go there. It happened to be that one of the reasons we were waiting was we switched out a special forces unit called Egoz. And what happened is Egoz took all their equipment, and they didn't have transport to get down south. So they took all the jeeps and armored cars and everything that's usually used for operations in Shechem, and they just piled them with equipment and guys and drove down south. It's such an Israeli thing to do of there's no cars, so just take any vehicle you can and get out of here, which was the right thing to do for them because they were able to start battling the Hamas terrorists immediately. But that means we were left without a primary means of transport in a combat zone. So this was why we were waiting a little bit.
All right, so you're at Tomet Tapuach. How long are you there for? Are you there for a day, a night, an hour?
It's a couple of hours because then our battalion commander calls us. We're sitting kind of like on an embankment, and we're told all the sergeants and lieutenants we're about to have a briefing, and we're sitting there. We're about to have this briefing, and everyone's phone suddenly starts going off. And we look at our phones, and it was surreal in that it was a message from the army saying there's been a general call-up. We need to deploy to our draft base as soon as possible. This is 5 hours after the fact. We're ready to go, and they're still waiting for us. And then the first thing we did was we then broke off into our different platoons, and everyone was sent to a different area in the immediate vicinity. The fear at the time was terrorist infiltrations into the communities and settlements around Shechem. So we sent certain units were sent to be a blocking force. All the roads were blocked. Some of the Arab villages were put on immediate lockdown, and my platoon was sent to a tiny little hilltop called Evyatar, and we were sent there on. Our first mission was to make sure there was extra soldiers there in case there was a terrorist infiltration. And our secondary mission was to prepare reconnaissance of the Arab towns to see if they're preparing anything, if there's celebration, if we can see movement of armed individuals. And immediately already at night, we started doing that.
So this is the night, this is Motzei Simchat Torah.
This is the night of the 7th.
Right, so it's still a holiday.
It's still a holiday.
In this entire time, have you called your wife? Have you called home, or have you decided it's a holiday, it's Chag, I'm here in the army, I'm on my phone, I'm doing what I need to do because that's the reality of the situation. But for my wife and children, it's still a holiday. They're not using their phones. I'll call them at night.
The truth is, it was a combination of both. I didn't even think about it's by this stage. It wasn't really a Chag. I didn't feel a Chag, but I also didn't want to call until I felt it was the right time to call. I have a mission to do right now. My mind and body had shifted from being a father to being a soldier. That was my primary mission, and I was totally engrossed in that.
It's a good place to be.
You asked me about Shabbat and Chag. As Shabbat comes out, we're called to the center of the yeshuv. They said they're making Havdalah, which is the ceremony for the end of Shabbat and Chag, and we're extra soldiers. And everyone knows there's a war, but they did a large Havdalah ceremony, and they wanted to know if we wanted to join. We were there. As the last bracha for Havdalah was said, Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, we heard this scream. A woman started screaming and yelling, and which almost confirmed our greatest fear. If somebody's screaming in the middle of this tiny yeshuv, that means something really bad has happened. And immediately we just sprinted as fast as we could to the source of it. And in this house was a couple who were lying on the ground crying. They had heard that their son had been deployed to Gaza, and it appeared that he'd been one of the first confirmed military casualties. As Shabbat had gone out, they'd got the news that their son had been killed in combat, and their natural reaction was just to scream.
That's heavy.
That was until then, as I said, I mentally and emotionally, I saw myself as a soldier. That was the first time emotion took over for a short period of time of Jews, Israelis are being killed. We're in a war. This is bad.
Wow. It's a bit of a reality check right there in your first day. Okay. So from there, you guys you're there for a day, and then at some point you guys make it now to where you're supposed to go, I'm guessing, eventually.
So the next afternoon, we were called back, and we all make it. We now drive down to the divisional headquarters, which is where we were supposed to initially be based.
Right, and you guys start regular operations of war, like every other unit in their sector, wherever they are, like they have their schedule for wartime. Like by us in Gaza, we actually worked more during the day than the night, which we found surprising in the end. But like we had like hours. Your clock may not have been a 24-hour day. It may have been like by us, it was more of like an 8-hour day each day. But what was it like from that point on?
So from that point on, it became very much a scheduled daily routine. What would happen is from the late morning to early afternoon, we would be training for the mission of the next night. In the late evening, we would be given a briefing about what our operation or our duty was for the next night, whether it was moving into a village or into a town or an arrest. In some cases, it was even just a patrol in a certain area so that they would see armed soldiers walking around. There were a whole lot of different missions we would do in the evening until the late morning, until the early morning. And this was our routine. Mission briefings in the afternoon, preparation, missions at night, come back and sleep. And we got into this incredible routine of doing this, at least for the first couple of weeks. We would do this all the time. And so we got into this routine. Now, a couple of things I just want to go back and explain. You asked me earlier, when did I call my wife? The first time I actually called my wife, I think, was on Monday or Tuesday. Because when we moved down to the divisional headquarters, even though it's a divisional base, they didn't have room for hundreds of extra soldiers. So initially, we were actually all sleeping in a hall, and then we were sharing showers. And I'd been in uniform since Saturday morning. I had my first shower on Tuesday morning. And I also realized that I was still wearing my same socks from Shabbat and underwear. But I noticed the same socks from Shabbat. That's when I called my wife and we spoke. It was a difficult conversation. Abby said to me when we were speaking on the phone for the first time was her realization that something was completely off was we've been married for over 20 years. And when she came into the bedroom for the first after Shabbat, my Shabbat clothing was strewn all over the floor. In 20 years, every time I put my Shabbat clothing away, I either put it in the laundry or hang it up. For 20 years, I put my clothing away. And the fact that I left my clothing strewn out all over the floor, that was Abby's sign that something was very wrong.
Or something was very right. Because now your mind had shifted from being a father and a husband to being a soldier.
Absolutely.
And the clothing that's no longer necessary, that's not part of your mission, was no longer important.
I never thought about it like that. It was very much, it was a mind shift of what is important now is my role as a soldier, getting to the base as soon as possible. I never thought about it like that, yeah. Okay.
Right, so while you're on base, you're getting into a schedule, you're getting into like a rhythm. You guys are sleeping in the morning, you're working at night, you have this rhythm going on. What else is going on around you on the base? Now, again, you're in a divisional headquarters base, so there's an enormous amount of other stuff going on there. I'm sure that you have, you experienced or you were aware of some of it, not all of it for sure. You see that there's other things going on. You're in this rhythm. What else is going on? Was there either in the bigger picture, like in the world, like what else is going on, or what else is going on with your team?
So it was, what was going on with my team, my soldiers, is without even saying anything, we all had this understanding that the war is happening and we're part of it, but we're living in our own separate bubble. Our job is to make sure that the entire area around us, from Shechem all the way down, is secure and safe, and that nobody who has ill intent is able to carry out any type of operation or terrorist attack. And we were so zoned into that I think all the atrocities, and by now it's very clear all the terrible things that happened, that was very far away from us. Unfortunately, even sometimes I'd say even our family, we were speaking regularly to our families, but we'd be on the phone speaking to families, and then when you turn off the phone, you're back to dealing with your team and what's going on. And over time, part of our rhythm was developing social interactions and even happiness. We joked for a while that we said we're the only normal place in the country because we were smiling, we were joking, we were singing, we were having barbecues. The rest of the country was at war and depressed and sad. We were operating at an incredible pace. The things we were doing at night and the arrests and the operations were crazy. But on our downtime, we were actually having, as hard as it is to say now, and in retrospect it sounds kind of strange, we were having a good time.
That's not strange. I think most soldiers who are in combat, I know I personally can agree to attest this also, and I don't think everyone I've spoken with would share that same feeling. We were, because you had what to do. You were taking part in it. You were doing something. You were fixing the problem. You were part of fixing the problem. You weren't sitting at home watching it on TV where there's nothing. You weren't helpless.
Right. I think that's probably the best thing. There's that feeling of all these things are happening and we're taking part in it.
Okay, so you mentioned barbecues and singing and stuff like that. Now, as I know, and as most people getting on army bases, that's not a normal occurrence. There's barbecues on army bases. Now it's become a little bit more normal. But what was it like with the interaction with the civilian world on army bases? Donations, barbecues, people singing. Okay. What was that experience like?
So this was part of an incredible experience. Our base by now it had thousands of people, and they were just churning out meals all the time. The chadarochel, the dining room in the base, was working 24/7 because soldiers were on different missions throughout. Whereas usually the dining rooms in the bases have very strict times. You know, from this time to this time is breakfast, and if you miss it by 30 seconds, you will not eat until lunchtime. And lunchtime is from this time to this time, and God forbid you're not there. But this was just meals 24/7 because soldiers were always on some type of operation. And while there was a lot of the food in great quantity, the quality left significant holes. But that was filled by just an astronomical amount of donations that were coming in. You could go to the main gate of the base any time of day, and there would be somebody who would drive through, and he would come with bags of crisps and chips and pizzas and hamburgers. And then some nights a guy would come and say, okay, tonight I'm going to be here at 5:00. I'm going to bring 50 people. We're going to make a barbecue. And it was just one thing after another. There's a group of Olim from France who came back, and they had cartons of cigarettes. I don't smoke, but they were just handing out cigarettes to anyone. A couple of days later, a guy pitched up with probably about 200 hamburgers. And it was incredible. What was funny about that is a guy pitched up with 200 hamburgers. An hour later, somebody else pitched up with 100 pizzas. So there was the issue of meat and milk. But you know what? But it was, I think that added to it, when I say our feeling of happiness, was before October 7th, there was this perception that Israel was in a very bad way socially. This, for me, was the example of when it comes to what really matters, everyone is in this together. And a lot of people, as you said, were sitting at home watching the terrible things unfold. And they said, no, you know, even if we need to go and give a soldier a pack of cigarettes, or I'm going to buy 100 pizzas and drop them off at a base. And this is what happened. And it made no difference. We had ultra-Orthodox Haredim coming and dancing and singing for us. We had Chilonim, you know, secular people from Tel Aviv coming and making a barbecue for us. We had people from the most crazy settlements in the Shomron, who are these ultra right-wingers, meeting with the seculars from Tel Aviv and preparing a meal for the soldiers. It just added to this feeling of, as a nation, we're in a bad state, but this is what's going to get us through. And it was a very uplifting experience with all the hardships. And over the course of that first month that we were there, we went through some really crazy things operationally, whether it was doing operations in Shechem, shootings, bombings, all these things that were operationally incredibly difficult, also physically incredibly demanding. I'm over 40 years old. I shouldn't be running up and down mountains and things like this. And I felt my body was slowly starting to accommodate to the new physical reality. And with all this was happening is the country is coming together. And it was an uplifting feeling of, we're going to get through this.
Wow, that's an amazing observation. Was yeah, definitely. I think it took Hamas to reunify Israel.
It did take probably the worst tragedy in the country to make us realize that we're all in this together. Before October 7th, when we had the entire country fighting and screaming over the judicial review and Netanyahu and anti-Netanyahu and everything else, the perception was that we were heading to a very bad place as a country. I disagree with that. That it was a perception. I don't agree with the fact that the country was heading in a bad place. Because the minute we needed to come together, we did. So if the reality was that we were divided, it would have taken a lot longer for us to come together. And it was the exact opposite. We needed to come together, and instantly we put our differences aside and came together. Because we realized at the end of the day, whether you're left or right, this is our country. Whether you're against Netanyahu or for Netanyahu, when you're wearing your uniform, we don't care.
Wow. Okay, so now at some point you guys move from the divisional headquarters. You guys move up to an army base on top of a mountain called Har Rival, which has a lot of personal relevance for me because that's where I spent about a year and a half of my regular army service. Was one of my favorite places to serve. And just to fill in for our listeners, Har Rival is a mountain. It's the tallest mountain in all of Samaria. It has this huge but mostly empty army base on the top of it. You feel like you're on top of the world because you can see every direction, every way. There are nights where there's fog where you can't even see what's below. You see just the top of the mountain, right?
Yeah.
And you're up there, and what's it like going back there? I mean, you went up there now. You were up there for about a month and a half.
So my platoon was moved there for two different reasons. One is they needed to have a new armed presence on top of the mountain. The unit that was there didn't really have they were rushed there. There were a lower level combat unit that was rushed there when the special forces unit was moved to Gaza. And my unit was volunteered to move there. My platoon was volunteered to move there. So the first thing we had to do is secure the base, set up a perimeter and everything else. The base, unfortunately, had been, I wouldn't say, almost abandoned over the last couple of months, but particularly during the war, the unit that was there didn't really understand their mission. And the second thing we needed to do is now we needed to provide proper oversight. The base, as you know, has an incredible view of Shechem below it. And part of our job was to see what was going on in Shechem for future missions. So we were always on call 24/7 because the base is very easy to attack, unfortunately. We were always on call, always getting ready, always on some type of operation. You were either patrolling the base, guard duty, or on some type of observation duty. And if you weren't doing that, because we're only a small platoon, then we had our own rotation in the kitchen. And if you weren't doing any of that, you were sleeping. And if you were very lucky, you had a chance to shower and quickly put back on a different uniform. And that was what we did for a couple of weeks. And that also was a period of personal rejuvenation. It was hard and difficult, but my platoon, after a number of incredibly difficult and complicated operations, and unfortunately a number of people actually weren't able to continue with us for physical reasons and injuries, but this was our opportunity to rejuvenate ourselves and just our platoon and our combat teams, including the fact that our lieutenant, unfortunately, also wasn't able to stay with us because of the intensity of our operations. He got a number of injuries, and we had, of all things, one of our senior sergeants took over as lieutenant, and I was promoted to his deputy. So we were two sergeants instead of an officer on this hill, and it was incredible. We felt like we were on top of the world, like you said. Some mornings you would wake up and you would look down on the clouds. It was amazing. It was beautiful. And we also had stuff that we laughed at. One night, for example, somebody over the communication said, there's a drone over the base, and that set the entire division on air. And we started preparing all our equipment because a drone attack had been one of the scenarios that we were most scared of. And we prepared our equipment and snipers and machine guns, and we were getting ready to fire. And then we get on the radio with the divisional head commander, and he asks for a picture, and he says, okay, if you have a sniper, you can start firing at it. And our sniper starts shooting, puts out a couple of rounds, and he's well below the target. And then I pulled out my cell phone and I turned on a star map. And I said, you're probably not going to hit the star you're aiming at. So it was really funny, a joke, ha ha. Again, in retrospect, it's weird. We were laughing about shooting in a drone, but that was part of the experience.
You're laughing at shooting at a star. Wow. Okay. So about all this time now, it's been about 2 months into the war from October 7th. Have you gone home at all? Have you seen your wife and kids for a day, for 2 days? Did you get a break at all? Or have you been going straight in this intense nightly operations up on Mount Hareval, like in this intensity for 2 days? Have you had a break at all during this time?
So yeah, we did have a couple of breaks. Initially, they were unplanned. The first break I had, the first time I saw my family was after about 2.5 weeks. We were sent Gush Etzion, which is in Judea. One Friday morning, my platoon was sent to a training base called Caliber 3 right outside Efrat, and it's a little bizarre. Why? Because one of our missions we had was if there was a terrorist infiltration, we need to get to whichever yeshuv as quick as possible to deal with the terrorist infiltration. But at the same time, all the different yeshuvim in the area had their own extra response teams, which were now military. So we had military units already in the yeshuvim, but we were the first unit that had to get to certain areas. So, and we didn't have a chance to train with these other units. And the army realized the fear that everyone had was not only just a terrorist infiltration, but if you've got two units that aren't familiar with each other, the chances of a friendly fire incident were astronomical. So one Friday morning, early in the morning, we drove to Caliber 3 training ground, and we actually did a couple of live fire exercises. They've got a massive close quarters combat training range, and we used it to just familiarize ourselves with some of the other response teams in the area, which was an excellent thing to do. And then I drove home. It was a Friday afternoon. I called up my wife. I said, Abby, I've got a couple of hours. I'm coming home. And it was great. I got to see my kids. We had a falafel. I threw some laundry in for a little bit. So we had lunch. And unfortunately, then I had to go back. So that was the first time I got to see my family. And then a week later, it was the first time one of our night operations got canceled. And me and another guy who live in Jerusalem were like, well, wait a minute. If the night operations got canceled, we're not going to be doing anything until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Let's just go home. We spoke to my lieutenant. He said, yeah, absolutely. Go home. And that was the first night I got to sleep at home. I got home. Everyone was sleeping. Threw my laundry in. I had a great shower. And then I woke up my kids the next morning. It was the first time I'd see them in weeks. And I took my son to school. I took my one son to school and everything else. And then I had to come back to the army. So those were the first time seeing my family. And then after that, as we left Hareval, it was the first Shabbat. Now this was nearly 3 months later. It was the first Shabbat. I got home on a Thursday night, and I spent Thursday night until Sunday morning with my family.
Wow. And then you guys got into a schedule, or then you were back for good until the end?
Okay, so now we get to the longest stretch in the army. We now moved one more time. Not only my platoon, but my entire company moved to, remember in the very beginning I spoke about Tzomet Tapoch? We moved there.
Okay.
So this became our home January, February, March at least. This became our home for the next few months. Our job there was primarily protecting the intersection, which I explained was very important. So we had guard duty on the intersection itself. That means all four areas of the intersection. We were there for 4 hours a day with loaded rifles, checking all the cars coming in and out. In addition to that, we had Jeep patrols around.
Jeep tours makes it sound like you're going on a tour trip in the desert.
Right. I wish. Jeep patrols that we had to do around that area. And then we also had nightly missions, which was every night a different company in my different platoon in my company would go out on missions. And this became our new routine. So you were either guarding the intersection on a Jeep patrol or preparing or carrying out an operation, whether it was in Shem or one in the surrounding villages. And that became our operational activity for the next few months, and with the idea that every 2 weeks we got 3 days at home.
Okay, so that means you were in Miluim then for about 5 months.
From October 7th, I did 160 days.
Wow, that's a lot of Miluim. So now, after your 160 days of Miluim, you come home. You put your uniform in the laundry, you fold it back up, you put it back in your storage room. What's it like now shifting back into your regular life? Going back to work, getting back into the schedule with your kids to school, going to the supermarket. Like what your regularly scheduled life, what is it like now transitioning back into that after being in 160 days intensively in the military?
Wow, it was... So, to the Army's credit, the last 2 days, we actually had a seminar at a little spa right outside Jerusalem, where we had health professionals and psychologists speak to us and explain that you guys have been fighting a war for the last, let's say 159 days. It's going to be hard to get into civilian life. And they actually explained to us, like, simple things like going to the supermarket is going to be difficult. You're going to fight with your wife. It's normal. And it was important, they said to us, they said, you're going to have to pay bills for the first time. Many of us are going to come back and we're going to be frustrated at silly things, normal things we need to get back into. And then they even said to us something like, you're going to find it hard to go back to work. And after the seminar, I'm driving back. I drop a couple of my friends at home. And it's great. I'm home and I see the kids and they put posters on the wall and we had dinner. And the next morning, I fold up all my clothing and laundry and everyone's going back to their normal lives. The kids are going back to school. My wife's going to work. And I thought, you know what? I'll go to work too. I can do that. And I got dressed and I was really motivated. I got into the office. I sat down at my desk and I thought, I cannot do this. Mentally, I'm not ready for this yet. Everything that the psychologists had said was right.
It's weird when they do that.
Yeah, the professionals were right. And it took a couple of weeks for me to actually get back into normal life. Things like going back to a supermarket, interacting with people, friends and family who have no idea what I'd been through over the last 160 days was incredibly difficult. But there again, something that helped was getting back into a routine. One of the first things I did actually is every morning after I took my kids to school, I would journal. I had written over the last 160 days, I'd written personal notes to myself about different things that had happened. And then I sat down over a week and wrote it out in detail, all the different things that had happened. Not because I want to make it a book or even I wasn't even planning on this podcast at the time, but I needed to detail for myself all the different things that I'd been through, some things that I don't want to share with anyone. And I still keep it on my computer. It's a very personal journal. Nobody else has seen it. Every now and then I review it again and I remember something. And I'm also looking at it and thinking, wow, I don't remember that.
So before we end today's episode, as has become our custom, we like to end on a positive note. So from all of your experiences around October 7th and the months afterwards being in Samaria and serving in the reserves and then coming home, what is the one thing that gives you a strong reason to be hopeful or optimistic for Israel's future? What is the experience or the thing that you saw that you can hold on to and say, because of this, I know we're going to be okay? Okay.
So I was generally more positive about the future of the country even before. I definitely had a bit of a personal crisis during the war where even though I was operational and busy, I didn't feel an overwhelming sense of positivity, mainly because I was just too busy, I think. But now, what gives me hope for the future is the people of this country. We're always going to complain about the leadership, and I don't think the leadership is going to change. We've got good people in this country. From across the political perspective, across the religious divide, the people of this country make this place. The Israelis, Jews, we're resilient. We've been through some crazy things, and we get through it together. We make things work. Something's not working out the way it should, we'll make it work. We spend way too much time thinking about our leadership and how they're letting us down. Yeah, the leadership of this country, of our people, I think, are undeserving of the great people that are here. And that is my message of hope is, as Israelis, we're doing okay. We can always do better, but we're doing okay. We're gonna get through this as a country. I don't exactly know what it's going to be in the next couple of weeks or months or even years, but it will definitely be better because the people of this country will make it good.
Wow. Now I'm optimistic for Israel's future too. Okay, so that's the episode for today. I want to thank everyone for listening. And remember, like, share, subscribe, follow, do what you do, and help us share our message with more and more people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.